Thanks for joining us. My name is Troy Miller with F64 Live and IEPPV. We're putting this together as a team because, hey, both of us are awesome. And today I've brought Marc Charette on. Now, Marc Charette is a very distant friend of mine. I feel like I know him really well, but he is in Australia. And so we've never actually personally met. But I love his work, great personality. He's going to be fun to talk to today. What we're going to be doing is, if you've been following us, we had two sessions with David Swanson who talked about real estate photography, how to photograph a house, how to edit those images. And what Marc is going to do, he's going to kind of build on that with 360-degree photography, how he uses it in his business, how you might want to look at it for your business. Another thing about Marc, and I'll let Marc introduce himself here in a minute because he knows more about him than I do. He's also quite of a LinkedIn genius, and he just did a recording with Frederick Van Johnson from This Week in Photo. I don't know if that's live yet, but okay, yeah, so go to thisweekinphoto.com and you'll see it in the blog there. It's quite informative, and he was just schooling me a little bit before we get on here. Without any further ado, Marc, thank you and welcome for being here. Please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you do it.
Great. Thanks for having me. Troy, I really appreciate this. A little bit background. Well, to start off with, I should say that I actually didn't get into photography as a commercial service all that long ago. Like some of you in this room probably have been shooting possibly even more than I have, historically speaking. I actually started doing Google Street View virtual tour photography as a service about 5 years ago. And Google Street View, if most people know it, is really the world's largest virtual reality experience. You know, we often forget how powerful it is as a tool for being able to navigate and see the world. But one of the other areas that often is where virtual tour photography and 360-degree photography is used is in the real estate space, basically, because it's all about showing spaces. It's all about showing an environment, but in a way whereby you're kind of like a bug or a fly that's, you know, happens to be able to look all the way around. And for this session, what I wanted to be able to share with you a little bit about is more having to do with how does this fit into a workflow for a business if you're doing photography for real estate, or for that matter, for commercial spaces, because there's also commercial real estate, of course. That's the other area we can't forget exists. And basically some of the stuff I'll be talking about is actually more like tips, tricks, and also some warnings about how challenging this industry can be, and also how technically challenging it is, so that you can decide whether or not it's actually a good fit for you to add on to your portfolio of services. So what I'm going to do is I'll start off with a short presentation. So I'll do a screen share. We'll go through some slides, but also be showing you. You can probably see behind me, I've actually got my camera equipment that I use for doing the imagery. And by the way, also, if you got questions, fire them away, because I'll bet you there's going to be a lot of things I'm going to be saying. You're going to go, what the hell did he just say now? What is that word? Because there's some world of 360, it does include a lot of language that doesn't sound very photographic. It sounds more like you just walked into a lab. So
yeah, I think you made some of it up. I was listening to one of your talks, and I'm like, no, that's not a real word. Marc made that up.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I'll throw out 3 words right off the top, so that we're sort of, you know, on a plane of language that we can all understand each other. You will hear a word often in the world of 360-degree photography, and that is called equirectangular. And equirectangular is really a 2:1 ratio image, which, if you think about the way that a world is, you know, the world map, when you see a world map printed, it's all stretched out. Well, that's actually an equirectangular variation of what the world looks like. And so we often refer to that as being an equirec, okay, or a photosphere is another word that's used. But these are all versions of the same idea, which is a photo that's been converted from being all 360 degrees to a flat plane, so that you can edit it, you can do stuff to it, like you can do Photoshop or whatever you need to do to fix it, to make sure that it's correct. And then once you display it, you're actually loading that equirectangular image into a platform, whether it be Google Street View or another hosting platform like some of the real estate platforms that are available. and then you can actually show the content. So unlike a lot of other photos, you can't just kind of put it up on a on your website like any other image, like and say put the image at 800 by 600 and it's done. You just can't do that. You do need a lot more technical stuff in the background. So keep that in mind. And the other thing that we'll be talking about is really two spots in the image, which is looking straight up. And the word for looking straight up in a 360 photo is zenith. That's looking straight up. And then looking straight down in a 360-degree photo is nadir, N-A-D-I-R. So if you think about, if I actually say those words, hopefully you'll keep that in mind. I just don't want to dump those words onto you and you go, what did he just say?
Are you going to use the word nodal?
Well, yes, that's nodal point or no parallax point. That's another one. Yeah, we'll be talking about that. That's another little cool thing in the world of 360. I'm glad that is a fourth one. There's always a 3 version 0.1 of things you have to remember about photography in 360. And the nodal point, or the no parallax point more accurately, is in fact, let me just go grab one of my cameras and I'll show you what that is now if you want, and that'll get that out of the way. Okay.
Yeah, he's going to show us his nodal point.
Exactly. Gonna love that. So you can tell me if you can see this. I'm going to pull this chair out of the way here. Okay, I don't know if you can see this or not. Hopefully you can. But this particular this is a Canon 70D. It's nothing special. It's just a crop sensor camera. But when you're shooting 360 photos, you're using a fisheye lens. In this case, I'm using an 8mm Sigma, which is one of the most popular lenses for this kind of work. And I can get into more as to the reasons why. But you'll notice that
is that a full frame? I'm sorry. Is that a full frame?
No, it's crop.
Okay, all right. So that's important when it comes to fisheye.
It is, yeah, because what happens is we're actually seeing in the crop sensor the full height of the fisheye view, but the width on it is actually cut. So you're getting 180 degrees up and down, but you're getting about 120 degrees wide in the image in this case. Okay, so what happens is it fills the sensor up as much as you possibly can. Because if you can imagine, if I had put this fisheye on a full frame, you'd get a circular image in the center of the sensor. Whereas now we're actually filling out a lot more, okay? The beauty behind that then is it means that I get more pixels, I get a bigger, a bigger image in terms of quality to work with. And when I'm actually shooting 360 degrees with this one, I'm actually taking 4 images all the way around. So 1, 2, 3, and then 4 all the way around, all right? So I'm actually, and this is actually this mount, which is where we're talking about the nodal point or no parallax point. You'll notice that it's the camera and lens are mounted via the lens to make sure that the center of the parallax point inside the lens is right over the center of the tripod. So as I rotate, things in the distance don't basically move. Because you know how if you actually close one eye and do that and things move, that's the parallax effect, which gives you 3 dimension. In 2D photography, you have to eliminate that because then you're going to end up with stitching errors. Your images won't stitch properly. So that's what the no parallax point has to do with. And it gets far more complicated whenever you don't actually have a mount like this one, because when you get into, to show you a slightly larger rig that I use only for higher resolution shots, which is pretty rare, you use a rig like this one over here. Now, I don't know if this is pretty high up. Let me just tilt the camera up a little wee bit.
Yeah, we see it. We got it. Yeah.
You all right? You got it right?
Yeah,
okay.
We're good. We're good. Yeah.
Cool. All right. This over here is actually a Nodal Ninja mounting system. And what this does is it allows me to mount a far larger lens. You'll notice that the no parallax point has been adjusted to quite a ways in, right? So you actually have to basically back the camera up. So that means that when I actually take shots, and I need to take multiple shots, I can also take up and down shots and rotate, and I can stitch all those images so that all the stitching points line up.
So Mark, how does one find the no parallax point on your lens?
The way you find the no parallax, good question, is you actually, what you want to do is you would use, what I tend to do is I'll actually use 2 lighting stands, and I'll put them basically standing one in front of the other. And what you do is you rotate the lens on the parallax point that you think is approximately right. And as you rotate the camera on its axis, you'll see whether or not you can actually see the other lighting stand behind the first one. The idea is that as you rotate the camera, you want to be in a situation where the front lighting stand always hides the back lighting stand. It doesn't, the back lighting stand doesn't come into view.
Oh, got
And
it.
that's how
Okay,
you know if you've actually got it.
so there's not like, oh, you're using this particular lens. Here's that no parallax
Oh,
point. This is like every lens you have to find it and dial it in.
and every lens, and if you're using a zoom lens, it can actually change depending on the distance in zoom. Like if you're actually a 16 to 35 like I've got now
Oh,
on
right,
this one over
right.
here, if I dial into 24 mil, the no parallax point might be a little bit different
Oh,
depending
so
on,
if you set that up on a lens that zooms, you got to know what you set it at.
yeah,
Otherwise, yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so one of the favorite things for most virtual tour photographers to do is they tend to avoid zoom lenses. They tend to stick around, we tend to use, prime lenses for that. Plus, they tend to be a lot sharper. It's just easier to work with. But that's the principle behind how you
All right.
actually
So you
set it
just
up.
saved everybody a couple hours of work and we're done. That's
Yeah, yeah,
that would
yeah.
screw up
It's
your day if you had that wrong.
but taking an image like using one of these rigs it's not you don't just kind of show up and start shooting. Like you have to set up your rig. You've got to make sure that you're level, no different than in any other photography. For real estate, you want to make sure that your walls are nice and straight and that kind of thing as much as you possibly can. So there's more involved in setting up your equipment and using your gear. It's not straight up photography. There's a lot more to it. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what's involved in doing that kind of imagery. So again, it's this particular kit is from Nodal Ninja. This is a Nodal Ninja NN4, which is no longer manufactured. And I've got a rotator base, which it's set right now at 60-degree rotating points, but you can set it from 7.5 degrees all the way up to I think it's up to 90 degrees. So you can do basically, and the whole idea of these rotators is that this helps you remind you to stop at a particular point. So it locks in that stop point. So when you're going around, you're making sure that you've got the right level of overlap for your stitching.
So that's what I was going to ask you next is like I noticed on the fisheye you said that it's 4 rotations, right? You're taking one
Mm-hmm.
quarter of the room at a time.
Yeah.
So basically if you were to go with a longer lens like this, you would
Mm-hmm.
want to just take more photos, right? So maybe it's 8 to
You
get the
have
whole
to.
room. Okay, okay. And
Yeah.
why would you want to use one like a fisheye over a longer lens? What's the benefit?
The benefit of the fisheye is just faster. And you got to
Oh,
think
okay.
about what platform are you going to be showing your imagery on? Because if the only thing the images are going to be looked at is a mobile phone, you don't need to get a lot of resolution. So fisheye, the number
Mm.
of pixels you can end up with is more than plenty, even if you pinch zoom on a mobile phone. But if you're going to be doing something where it's going to be looked at, where the pinch zooming is going to be like extreme, like some 360 photos that have been shot are done at the top of a large building, right? And you're looking down over the city and you want to be able to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. Well, at that point in time, you're going to need to have you're going to need a bigger lens. And the bigger the lens is, the more stitched images you're required to create the image. It's basically, if you've ever heard of what a gigapan image looks like, it's the same idea, except as opposed to just going wide, you're going all the way around.
Got it.
So, yeah. Okay. So this over here is, again, this is a kind of an overkill kit for most people. Generally speaking, a smaller kit with a fisheye lens is more than plenty. And in some cases, a lot of people will even resort to using very inexpensive equipment, such as these types of cameras, which are the little one-shot cameras. This is from a company called Xiaomi, and it shoots a 23.8 megapixel spherical image.
Another
And
made up
this is
word.
Yeah, and yeah, well, actually, Xiaomi, it's actually the name of the company. They're an Asian company. It's also known as the Mi Sphere. Um, and then there's one over here with the Ricoh Theta, which is probably the most popular one of them all. And to be honest with you, I don't use these for any commercial work at all. I use these for proof of concept to show people what an image might look like. There are people who sell using these cameras. They sell imagery in the real estate marketplace. It's quick. It's far simpler than trying to stitch images after the fact. But the problem then becomes is just image quality. Really, there's a lot of limitations in terms. You can't pull out a lot of dynamic range out of a little tiny sensor this size. So those are the limitations.
Got it.
All right.
I'm gonna grab some links for those here. Yeah, that
Yeah.
Xiaomi
Cool.
is I think it's like
Yeah.
200 bucks.
Yeah, so like those are great little cameras for doing, if you want to do a quick tour, you want to give somebody an idea as to what's involved in doing a 360. And then probably, and I won't get too much into it, but you probably can see at the very back here, I've got this great big massive oversized tripod that I use for doing elevated photography, and I do use it for 360s also, but that's actually a 7.2 meter tripod. I think
Oh, I
Peter,
have a.
who's signed in, took a great image of me doing a shot down near the ocean a few months. Was it 2 months ago? Yeah,
You mean
that
that one?
shot. Yeah, that one. That's the beast fully extended.
Now, what is on top of that?
Well, at that time, I actually was using the 8mm Sigma. That's what I was shooting with at that time. So even in a situation with that, I tend to just put the 8mm for doing 360s almost all the time. It's just an easier lens to work with.
So you have a DSLR on top of that.
Yep.
And then how are you rotating it so that the tripod doesn't come down? Because if you loosen the bottom,
you can actually rotate the whole pin.
Oh, so is that meant to do 360s, or is that just a tripod that?
It just happens that the tripod allows it, which is a great thing. It was one of the conditions for me to buy it is, could I actually rotate the whole tripod, basically as a rotating piston on the inside from the bottom.
Fully extended.
Section. Fully extended.
Okay. I mean, I guess worst case is, right, you don't extend that bottom.
Correct.
Which in this case you would lose, 3 feet of height or something. So
exactly. Yeah. So the whole, the only time I take that thing out is if I actually really need to get a different level of elevation. That would be really useful in a situation where if you're doing, a real estate shoot of a 3-story home, it's a relatively large home, and you really want to have that view of looking onto a balcony or something like that. Then it looks really, really, really schmick. It's a pretty cool field of view.
Has that blown over?
Not yet.
Actually, but Peter's short tripod blew over, but your giant tall tripod.
The reason why is, generally speaking, when you're actually shooting with one of these, guy wires, stakes, there's actually holes in the bottom of the feet.
Got it.
Yeah, and you tie this sucker down.
And if you can't,
it will fly.
Yeah, if you can't, then do you sandbag it?
Yeah, I've got sandbags that I keep in the garage. Put them in the car if I need them. Yep.
Cool.
So yeah, definitely, it's a beast to use. Ideally, if you're doing shoots with that thing, you really should be 2 people. So you've got a spotter who can actually keep an eye on what's happening, because you might not even notice that if you're not perfectly straight up, and there actually is a level that comes with it that you actually mount on the leg, on the center point. If it's just leaning more than about 5 or 6 degrees, man, that thing, once it goes, good luck. It's just going to keep going.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in some of his equipment list, just let me know, and then I'll put it in when I post it on YouTube. I'll put it in the description.
Cool. All right.
I mean, why should we do all the research? You've already done it, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. I can give you plenty of recommendations, and it's all very dependent on the existing gear you've already gotten. What do you want to upgrade to, and all that, because some of it can get a little expensive. But let's just go into the presentation if we can now. So I'm going to do a screen share. So I'm going to click on present, and hang on, I guess I got to do screen share first, right?
Yeah, you got to do screen share and then pick your window.
Okay, so there. Okay, and all right, tell me, can you see that all right?
Yes.
Super. Okay, all right, super. So all right, so should you offer virtual tours? That's the question number 1. Is this even something you should be considering doing? And because if you don't, really, the fact of the matter is that, especially right now, with COVID-19, the coronavirus is forcing a lot of real estate agents to start thinking about how can we continue to do showings of properties when we're dealing with the inability to have people in the same space at the same time. You can't have social distancing is really causing a lot of these problems. I don't even like to use social distancing. I'd rather call it physical distancing. But that's really that's one of the reasons why I believe that this is actually a market area that's going to grow an awful lot more over time, because people's awareness of the technology, once it kicks in because of coronavirus, isn't necessarily going to go away. And it's already an area that has a reasonably strong footing because of some of the technology that's already out there. And one of the greatest risks for photographers in terms of choosing to do it or not is that their biggest competition is going to be the real estate agents themselves. I don't know what it's like so much in the States, but I can tell you here in Australia, real estate agents are not big fans of spending a lot of money on imagery. It's an absolute minimum expense, whatever it takes to get the property sold. And if that's the case, and if they can figure out a way to do it themselves, chances are they will. Okay, so be aware of that. And what they'll probably do it with is one of those small little 360s I was showing you earlier on. And they're not going to get the results, but so really your point of difference should really be your ability to provide a better quality product and service. So when you look at the real estate marketplace right now, the vast majority of it is actually done with either 360 cameras, rigs like I've got, or a system called Matterport, and I'll be talking a little bit more about Matterport as a powerful tool, highly respected, but has some downsides to it, and they're a bit of they're perceived as a bit of an evil company in some ways in the photography industry. Yeah, they're a bit evil. Like it's like the opposite of the early days of Google, where it was don't be evil. These guys are kind of evil.
So Mark, what would be some of the other markets other than real estate that you could use this in?
In terms of commercial industries, I see a lot of value in it in forensics, for example. Actually, one of the areas where 360 photography has already been used for quite some time is in police forensics. When they actually need to be able to collect data of a scene, a crime scene, so that because that gives you a complete sense of the space as it was at that time. So that's one area. Another one is insurance for on the sort of pre-category of insurance. So if an insurance company wants to insure let's say a manufacturing plant, and they want to have a status quo shoot of what exactly is it that they're insuring, and then if there's a claim, there may be a requirement for a follow-up of a photography shoot for claim to show what damage took place, so they can actually document that with the 360. Mm-hmm. So again, because 360s have the impression of not being able to be photoshopped as much, although they can be, but it's harder. It tends to make people feel like they're not lying. It's more realistic. It's more authentic of what the space was like.
So and of course can a 360 be turned? Can a 360 presentation be turned into a video presentation?
It can, yes. You can actually convert it to 360. If you've actually looked at any content on YouTube that's 360 before, you can actually basically create a 360 slideshow from photos that are 360 and convert it into a video and still look at it in a video-like format. So that's an option that can be done.
Got it.
And with the with higher-end 360 cameras that are one-shot cameras, they tend to be more focused for video collection, but they do suffer with a lot more of that parallax effect, because if you've seen what those larger 360 cameras look like, and one that Troy, you may want to pull up as a reference point, one I don't have is called an Insta360 Pro, and it looks like a basketball basically with a bunch of lenses on it. It's got 8 lenses on it, and that one allows you to do 360 3D, but it does it at 8K. So it sounds like a lot of resolution, but you got to remember that in the world of 360, 8K is never really. It's not like watching 8K video on a screen, because you're only ever seeing a certain section or portion of that imagery at any given time. But that's another camera that's actually used more for video than for photo, though, simply because of the fact that that's really what it was designed for.
Got it.
All right. And of course, the last category of business that really is what I've been doing is basically for commercial marketing purposes. So if you think about where Google Street View photography is powerful, is being able to show cafes, restaurants, accommodation, function centers. I think of Troy, for you, in every function center that hosts weddings ought to have a virtual tour of the premise, especially now, so they can show the brides what does this place look like before they come and have a look at it, because they can probably virtually visit 5, 6, 7, 8 venues first, and then decide.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. And for me as a photographer to be able to see what the place looks like
in advance,
that would be great. Also, I'm sitting here thinking like F64 Live, like I'm doing this event in this downtown Santa. Like, there's no way I can tell you in photographs what this place looks like. you know, and I'm thinking,
Mhm.
all right, how do I get you out here to,
Yeah.
to
Well, this is
create?
exactly it. This is the kind of use you really do need to think about virtual tour photography and 360 photography as a utility. It's a service and a utility. Yes, it can be artful. It can be, it can be beautiful, but it's really about being a business or a business service or a product that you're offering to people for some utility.
Right.
All right. So obviously, I'm already touching a lot on the biggest barriers to entry to this is, start with the technology, right? We've just talked about a whole bunch of gear you may not already own. And so you may have to think about looking in your bag, and if you've already got some equipment, but not all of it, needing to fill those gaps. So a company that's definitely worth checking out if you're looking at this space is Nodal Ninja. Really, I highly recommend them. They're probably one of the few companies that produce high quality 360 equipment. I own a number of different heads from them also. And they're just known as being sort of the leaders in this space. All right. So, is this a fad or is this a new core service? I think it's going to be a new core service, really. And that's my view. In fact, if you were to talk to a guy by the name of Kevin Kelly, if you've ever heard of Wired magazine, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a
Yep.
magazine that's been around for quite a long time. Kevin Kelly, who started Wired magazine, actually said about 3 years ago that most websites are going to be VR based, 5 to 7 years out. That was his prediction. He tends to be a little bit aggressive on that. Even Gary Vaynerchuk is already saying the same thing, that he figures by 2025 it's going to be commonplace. So the right time to get into this and get comfortable with it is probably now, because you want to be ahead of the game so that you know how to use this stuff. As far as the expense, to give you an idea in terms of the cost, one part of the cost obviously is lenses and mounts, like that Nodal Ninja mount that I was showing you that holds that 16 to 35 mil and the 60 that I'm using on it. That's about a $500 head. So it's not huge money, and that's $500 to $600 for a head that'll allow you to do that kind of thing. It's not bad. The small one that holds the 8mm cost me, I think, $300, $400 in that ballpark. So you have to think about that. And of course the fisheye lenses. And the other thing you definitely want to be doing is make sure you've got some solid remote controls, because chances are you're going to need to you need to remotely trigger the camera for two reasons. Number one, for camera shake reasons, but the other thing is so that you can get out of the scene. And what I mean by getting out of the scene is, imagine where you're taking a 360 photo, and no matter if you're behind the camera, and let's say there's glass, there's mirrors, especially in a house or in a bathroom, you've got to be able to get yourself out of the shot. So remotely triggering your camera is a really important thing to have as another piece of equipment. And obviously the right tripods. So like have a variety of relatively solid tripods that will hold your camera, because a lot of the time, because you're not going to be shooting with flashes or speed lights, you're going to be doing an awful lot of high dynamic range type photography. You're going to be doing long exposures. A lot of my exposures are 30 seconds long when I'm doing internal spaces. Like, for example, I did a place called Planet Fitness, which is a big fitness center. And their cycling room was completely black. It was pitch black with a couple of black lights in it. And that's the way they actually do their room. So I had to show it with that ambience, right? So you can imagine you're shooting a lot of very, very dark images, so very long exposures. So, you want to have a camera that's not going to be bouncing around much. And in
Hey,
terms of how long, go ahead. Cool.
so Mark, I do have a
Um,
question. You had mentioned I think it was the nodal plate you had said is like $500 or $600.
yeah,
Is
exactly.
that US or Australian?
I purchased that one used because a guy was getting out of the business and gave it a go and failed, and I paid 500 Australian for that kit. But that actually was including the rotator and the leveling tool that came with it. So I got the whole lot. So,
Got it.
you could pretty well, I would suspect it's probably close to, 500 to 600 US brand new in that ballpark
Right.
for a kit like that. So the next question I had or point on the slides is, how long does it take to get from, you're actually set up with all your equipment, you've bought all the software, and you get to the point where you're actually selling? Well, you can expect that you're going to have to, number one, create some sample content so you can show everybody off how good you are at it, right? And then you have to be able to actually figure out how long it's going to take you to produce those images at a rate that people are willing to buy. And different markets have different time frames. Very similar to like if you're doing headshot photography versus wedding photography, the timeline from shoot to
Right. Yeah.
sales can be very different. Real estate agents, they want their images in their mailbox tomorrow morning. That's what they want, okay? Commercial spaces, usually you can get away with about a week and sometimes 2 weeks. Architectural or insurance, well, that could vary depending on what the application is. If it's just basically data collection, it might be a month out. They may just need for you to go and do it and supply it whenever, you know. But if it's actually on a claim, it might be that they need it like right away. Like as soon as you take the photos, go home and process and send it to, as fast as you possibly can.
Right, right.
So it depends on the industry that you can be working with. Okay. So I'll just bring up this slide over here again. Where is my screen share here? Oh, it disappeared because I've actually overlaid the screen share. Screen share. All right, so this one over here. So you've decided to go ahead and do this. What do you need? Well, first you got to think about what equipment you're going to buy, and then you got to think about what software you're going to be using. And I did mention Matterport earlier on, and I've got that there, and I'll speak to that first. Is Matterport is a closed environment. They sell the camera to you. They tell you which iPad you're going to buy to operate the camera from. They're going to tell you where you're going to publish the images, and they're going to charge you for all of it and own all of it. Okay? Yeah. Now, so have you got control over your content? No chance in hell, man. Seriously, you don't. But here's the thing why Matterport is really cool is it's virtual tour in a box, right? Like you buy the equipment, you show up, you take this short little training course, and it produces the imagery. And the net imagery for the most part is actually very good. And it does a couple of things that no one else does very, very well yet. That's starting to change. One of the things that they do is called the dollhouse effect. So what I do is I encourage people to go and check out Matterport and see what Matterport samples look like. I don't actually have any set up today because I'm not a subscriber to their program. But definitely one of the things that they can do that's particularly cool is it does a dollhouse. The other thing that the dollhouse effect does is it actually creates a floor plan of the house as you're shooting it. So because they actually have a LiDAR technology, which is the laser system that actually measures the room. So they can do both in one shot. Really slick as far as that goes. So that's the good news, why Matterport is really cool and why a lot of people like it. Cost is relatively high. I think the camera, the Matterport Pro 2 is somewhere in the area of roughly about $3,500 US. Plus you've got to buy the rest of the gear, and you have to pay for the hosting on top of that on their platform. So it's not a cheap thing to get into, but you also can get a lot of work out of it because people like that dollhouse effect. So that's what that's about here. Okay, I'm just going to go back to stop sharing here just for a second. So I want to basically talk about the other software items that were in that list, which was PT GUI, or the other ones, which are Infuse, EasyPano, Huggin, and there's a whole bunch of others. And those other ones, those are the software programs that if you decide to shoot using a regular DSLR like I do, you're going to be using those pieces of software along with the stuff you're used to shooting or using, like Lightroom, Photoshop, or Affinity Photo, those kinds of things. Those are the pieces of software you're going to need. And I'll be able to give you a short demo shortly on how I actually use the software to actually create the imagery too. Okay.
Yeah, I was just looking up the Matterport site. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, they get you everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously it's probably very nichey though, right?
It totally is. It's and and here's another thing. One of my biggest bugaboo about it in terms of image quality is it's actually not a proper 360 camera. It's a cylindrical camera, which means it doesn't shoot the zenith and the nadir. It has no way of doing them, and it doesn't even have any way of patching them. You can't patch it. So in other words, if you're doing a virtual tour of a house and you decide to put your Matterport camera right below or right under a chandelier that's absolutely gorgeous, you're not going to see the chandelier. So, because it won't be in the shot, because it's a cylindrical image. It doesn't actually shoot all the way up. Whereas if you're shooting with a rig like I've got, you can make a point of actually taking extra images with even a higher resolution and show it everything, full 360. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of Matterport. But again, I mean, some people look at it and go, look, I'm prepared to, give up on some of these things because I can walk into a house and just put the tripod down and just let it go do its thing. Because it's a motorized system. It actually automatically shoots all the way around. It just rotates. Another thing that Matterport won't do is it won't shoot very easily outside. It's not good at shooting outdoor imagery at all. It has a really hard time with trees that are moving or anything that's got motion in it. It tends to fail very badly. It gets very confused because it's more of a computerized device than it is a proper camera. Whereas with a 360 rig, if I want somebody in the image, because I'm doing a commercial shoot, like for example, somebody at a front desk at a fitness center, well, I can tell them, stand there and don't move. That would look really cool in it, right?
Yeah,
it becomes a proper photo shoot with, where you got models and you got talent. Whereas with Matterport, that's just not its strength. Okay. Going back,
I know you did a car lot where you
Yeah.
start outside and you literally can walk around the outside of the car lot, see the car
Yeah.
lot, and then go through the front doors and go into the building and go down the halls and see the
Yeah.
sales spots and stuff. And I thought, oh
Yeah.
my god,
And into the car.
brilliant! Yeah, into
Yeah.
the car in the showroom, and there's people there. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So that's the difference with being able to do it with proper camera equipment, is you can do things that are far more valuable and distinct. But that's where, as a business, you have to think about being able to sell that, and you got to be able to sell that in a way that really makes people think about the longevity, the long-term value of the images that you're actually creating. Because a lot of the time, the problem is that people are actually in the real estate space. They want to they want to basically get the shot, sell the house, be done with it, and it's over, right? So the lifetime value of a 360 virtual tour in real estate is shorter. There's no doubt about that. For commercial spaces, it's the longer it stays up, the more valuable it becomes, because you're building up on your SEO. So it's a different mindset altogether between the two.
and I'm sure everybody's taking notes right now on the sales points.
Yeah, I hope so, because that is absolutely critical. So I'm just going to go back to the presentation once again, just so I can get a couple more bullet points. There's not that many. I think I've got 2 more slides to go.
And
here.
I just put a link in there to that the car dealership.
Cool, awesome, great stuff. So I go back to now talking about the imagery. I had said earlier on that you also have to be sure that you know how to host the images, because they're not regular photos. You can print them. I've got some printed ones behind me, but really the point about this kind of photography is really about being shown digitally. And some of the most popular ways of showing the images, obviously Matterport shows their own product on their own platform because it's a closed system. But you can use programs like Pano2VR to create an HTML published virtual tour that you can give to a client that they'll actually put directly on their website. So Pano2VR is a end-to-end publishing tool. It doesn't help you stitch the images, but it does allow you to be able to create a finalized published tour. Pano2 Pro is another company that does the same thing, but if you see it, I would highly recommend you stay away from it, because it's bankrupt. They're gone. But there's tons of people thinking that they should use it. One of these days, and there's a lot of people who actually are using the source code from Pano2 Pro called KR Pano. And the problem with it is that there's no support. So it was actually a company that GoPro purchased, and they basically bought it and shut it down. So they're gone. 3D Vista is another one that's quite popular because they do some cool things. One of the online ones that I really like using, and I've used them on a number of occasions, is one called Kula. That's KWLA. And the reason why I like them is because it's something you can do for free initially. So if you give this a go to start off with, very quick and simple to do. And you can basically stitch your images and then put them up and show them off. And if you decide you want to do it commercially, then you can have a paid account to go from there. But there's a whole heap of different platforms you can use, and each one of them is dedicated to the industry you're going to be working in. For example, Virtual Tour Creator, that's specific to the real estate industry. Walk Into, that one is, and Go Through, those 2 companies are specifically for Google Street View virtual tours. SeekMe, they tend to be more for fancy virtual tours that are going to be including, for example, if you're doing like a music studio and you really want to have live audio, so you have virtual 360 audio included in it, SeatGeek will do that. So each one of these platforms has their own little niche, that they're actually working in. Okay, and then so basically, as I said, is this about photography or is it not? Well, actually, the fact of the matter is again, these images are in fact really about offering a business service. And the difference between you and someone else in doing this kind of work really comes down to the quality that you decide to shoot at. You can start by picking up a Ricoh Theta or one of those Mi Sphere cameras and give it a go. In fact, one of our friends in the TWIP Pro group community picked up a GoPro 360 camera recently, and he's been posting. I don't know if you recall, Troy, he posted a couple of his Little Planet shots recently.
Oh, William. Is that William?
Yeah, William, exactly.
William
yeah.
Bannock, yeah.
Yeah, so William's been playing around with it. He and I have been chatting a wee bit. And that's, again, great for that kind of photography, great for fun and for experimenting. But is it something that you can use commercially for this? Maybe, but probably not. Not if you really want to stand out and actually show that you got a quality product. But the real skill, if you wish, to shooting 360 is about understanding your equipment incredibly well, understanding the circumstances, and understanding the utility. Really, that's the first thing. And by knowing that, then you can then start thinking about your sales and marketing and how do you actually do this as a business. Because for the most part, people who get into this space, they think, oh, cool, I want to become a 360 photographer, or I want to be Google Street View trusted because it's cool to be called Google trusted. It's a bad idea. You got to really approach this far more from having technical skills and the ability to sell and run a business.
Yeah, like all the businesses, like we talked in the green room before we jumped on, what does it take?
Yeah. So really, if people were looking to get some training, I do actually offer some training in this space. If somebody wanted to learn how to use PT GUI, and if they want to get into really deep diving into this stuff, I can also refer you to some of the other really high-end photographers that I'm actually associated with who already have training programs, whether it be for the post-publishing, post-production. Even a friend of mine, John Warkington, who I mention very often, he's one of his most amazing photos that I've seen him shoot recently is the inside of a Boeing 787 cockpit simulator that a guy had built in his own house. I'm not kidding you. This guy was like full-on simulator. We're talking, there must be, a couple $100,000 worth of gear in there. It's just crazy. But to shoot that and to get it so that it'll look really good, he actually had to do focus stacking in 360.
Oh my
Imagine
gosh.
how much work is involved in doing that. It was a huge undertaking for him to do. And people will often think, oh, cool. And they don't realize how much work goes in producing that, right? So that's really the thing to keep in mind is that, if you're doing this, you have to think about what your niche is going to be and know where the big challenge is going to come from. Is that the vast majority of people who are going to be exposed to 360 will either be exposed to it because of Google Street View or Matterport. Those are the two areas. And so really think of getting yourself familiar with both those avenues first. And if you know both of those, then I think you'll have a much better understanding of really what's the best way to handle your approach towards getting into this space as a business. So that covers my presentation portion for now.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share a screen. Let's see if this works, because what I want to do is I want to show.
Yeah, that was a fun little tour to do. Worthington Mini Garage.
I don't think that'll.
Very good client of mine.
I think what I got to do. Let me stop the share because I want to show it full screen. Sure. So what I find to be really kind of cool is this one that I'm going to share here in a second. You have a person in there, right? Like this is one of those. Okay, here we go. So I went full screen. All right.
And you take one step back.
Yeah, if I take one step back, you got a guy hanging out there showing off. So this is obviously for, a mini dealership, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, what is what is something like this? What do you charge to do something like this? Just
Yeah,
general.
yeah, ballpark figure. Yeah,
Yeah, just to kind of know, is it worth getting into and spending the money
yeah,
for it?
absolutely. You know, if you think about like this particular shoot was, and if just for fun, you might actually really enjoy going into one of the cars too while we're doing this, because actually I did
Okay.
shoot the inside of these minis. This was probably about $1,000 to do this shoot. So it's all the amount of time, you know, so you can go right inside. It's funny because when you look at this particular car and the inside of this one, it was I actually had to tell them I really was disappointed they didn't clean the windscreen, and I really had a hard time trying to Photoshop all those little dirt spots on the bloody windscreen. So I did as much as I could, but there's a limit, you know. But yeah, so yeah, $1,000 for a shoot of this size is about right. It takes to actually do the photography on site was probably all up about an hour, hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
Um, you know, right? So on site, that's my on site time. And then the post-production side of it, I tend to allow roughly, but anywhere between 15 minutes, if I'm quick, per image to stitch, if everything goes exceptionally well, and as much as 2 hours per image to stitch. Like the one you're about to go into right now, which is inside this car. If you really look very carefully, you'll see some stitching errors and some failings, but more because it was incredibly difficult to keep the tripod stable on the seat, because you can imagine the
Oh,
seat's moving.
wow.
So there's a lot of photoshopping that went into this particular image, but it gives you an idea. Like that particular image was probably about 3.5 hours to get right, just to make it so that it worked.
So on that particular job, total shooting time to deliver,
Yeah, yeah.
how many
There's
hours?
probably about 6 to 8 hours of post production plus an hour, hour and a half.
Wow.
You know, and then there's also publishing. Publishing takes about an hour on average, which is
And
basically,
okay.
because you got to remember that once you've actually shot the images and made them look pretty, then you've actually got to put them on Google Maps or in some kind of a publishing platform and interlink them all and make sure that their GPS location is all correct. So that
Wow.
takes time too.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's some publishing work involved in 360 that's beyond the scope of just photography. So imagine where you're actually doing photographs for a website and your job includes putting the images on the website also, and and making sure you wrap your story around it.
Right. Right.
Okay. So that's that part of things. Now, if we want to, what we can do is I can actually show you a little bit more in terms of with some screen share of how I actually go about creating
Yeah.
these images. All right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
Then I
So
can
let's.
continue napping while I'm off
Yeah.
camera. No, nobody's
He wouldn't
napping.
do that. He would never do that. Okay.
Peter's napping.
So I am going to go screen share once again and maximizing this. So if you can you see this is Lightroom? Can you see that?
I think, hang on, I'm going to trust that it's there. My screen share went away. There it is. Okay, yep. I see
Okay.
a whole bunch of thumbnail views in Lightroom.
Yeah,
Yep,
exactly.
you
So
got it.
this was a number of 360 shots, the source images that I shot to create a virtual tour of a real estate property that's 20 kilometers away from here. And I'm just using this as a sample to show you what's involved. So when I actually take the images, I shoot very, very consistently. And there's one of the things you do when you're shooting 360s is you have to shoot in manual, and you absolutely want to be shooting in raw. And there's no latitude for making any mistakes in this space, because what happens is when you're actually shooting all the way around, each bracket has to be able to blend with the next field of view. So for example, I'll just open up this image over here looking towards the pool. Well, that particular image is, if I just go into my info, shot at 1/40th of a second at f13. You'll notice that I shoot from f8 to f13 most of the time, because you want lots of depth of field. You want everything in focus as much as you possibly can. But this particular shot looks a little bit on the heavy, a little bit overexposed. This is a bit on the underside, and I've got my normal shot. And I may do this over and over again until I get a good sense. And then once I've got, okay, all right, I've got that, I do the same thing again. So 1/40th, 1/60th, and 1/80th. And those will be my shots that I'll be using. And as I go around, you'll notice I'm always going to be using the same bracket settings all the way around. I don't modify that. So when you're actually exposing for a 360, you're exposing for both the brightest and the darkest sections, and also deciding on how many brackets you're going to require to create the imagery.
Because you're going to stack those into an HDR, basically.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, everything gets stacked. Yeah, absolutely. So once I've actually gone through this process, I've actually, I've decided which ones of these images are actually going to be the ones that'll be the final pick. And I do a little bit. Let me just go into the develop mode so I can show you. I don't know. Actually, that's not the develop mode. Where's my D? I don't do a lot of post processing. So highlights down 20, shadows up 20, a bit of clarity, bit of vibrance. That's about it. That's all I really do. But that little bit. And
you want to make sure that you do that on every image that you use in your set.
And you do it exactly the same way too.
Right.
Don't like everything you do in a set, like in a set of 3 brackets on 4 shots around, you've got 12 photos. So those 12 photos have to have been processed exactly the same way. All right. And then what I do is I export those into a TIFF, into individual TIFFs, I should say. So there'll be 12 TIFF files, 16-bit TIFFs. And the reason why I use 16-bit TIFFs is basically the software that I use for assembling the 360 photo. Really, the best way to actually assemble them is to maintain the best amount of dynamic range you've got, because when you start doing HDR blending, that's where you start screwing things up in a hurry, right? You know that, Troy. It's like that's where you get into danger zone.
Yep.
So the next step, once these have been exported, let me just pull up a folder over here of images. Where are they?
So you must love the new Lightroom feature where you can batch merge all those HDRs.
Well, actually, not well. You say but I do all my merging. The HDR merging doesn't happen in Photoshop or in Lightroom. It's all
really?
done.
So all of these images go into your app as separate files? Oh.
Yeah. So
see what happened? I jumped ahead. I made an assumption.
Aha! There you go. So let me just show you.
I'm just a wedding photographer. What do I know?
Yeah. There you go. So let me just go back one step over here. I'm going to get to the right processed images. Okay, pool area. So here, I don't know if you can see this or not.
No, we still see your Lightroom.
Oh, you do, eh? Okay, so stop share.
Yep.
And share screen. And now I'm going to share. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a bunch of TIFF images in there.
Yeah, we see them. Yep.
Okay, so there's the processed TIFFs. Okay. So you can see that I've got all those processed TIFFs that I'm actually going to be, and each one of these files, by the way, are, because of the way I process them, they're identical in size. They're all 116 993 kilobytes, basically. So 114 megabyte images, each one of them. So once I've actually got all of those shots, I then actually open up a program called PT GUI. All right, so PT GUI, so I'll actually have to stop sharing this one to open the next one, because this is like, there's a lot of steps that are involved in processing this. And some of it you can automate, but not all of it. All right, so, okay, so now I'm going to go to PT GUI. All right, so tell me if you can see.
Now, did you know that when you do a batch export out of Lightroom, that you can have it batch export to a folder and then run an application like a droplet?
No.
Yeah.
Really?
So yeah, okay. So you could automate that to say, hey, every time I output to this exact same folder, now I want you to go run this application. If that application has any kind of batch features built in or whatever, you can make it run on that existing folder.
Cool. That's useful.
It's a neat feature a lot of people don't realize you can do.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that, like, you know what happens in a lot of cases is we get used to doing things the way we've always done them, right?
I'm a big fan that if you can take one step out of your process, that's a win.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so hopefully I'm sharing the right screen. What are you guys seeing right now?
We see PT GUI. We see like a black screen lower right, folder screen top left. Okay.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm actually going to go in and load into PT GUI.
You know,
that same
Peter,
image.
this would be great for Peter to do stuff like this when he's out in the world in these crazy temples, and
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
he could do
shooting at
that.
this kind of stuff, you can really get some amazing stuff. In fact, actually, there's someone who I can introduce you guys to that does exactly that kind of travel photography and does beautiful work. A guy by the name of Tony Redhead, and he is
Wow.
phenomenal. I chat with the guy quite regularly, and he's gone to like places in Russia. He does a lot of cruises with a company called Ponant or Ponant. I'm not sure. It's a French cruise company, and he's been to the Antarctic and done 360 photography in the Antarctic, all kinds of cool stuff.
So
So
that's
anyways,
that grab those images and stack them almost
mhm.
instantly.
Well, actually, yeah, because they were pre-stacked in this case.
Oh,
Okay.
gotcha. Okay.
All right. What I'm showing you is the outcome, because the process of actually stacking these images, if I actually, let me just show you the whole process. So if I start a new project and I load images, and let me just go down and I'll show you the process of loading the images directly. So current project, we're going to go back to this address and processed, and we're going to go to the pool
And
area.
PT GUI is $140 for a
Yeah,
personal license. So it's not
not super expensive, but get the pro. There's no reason not to get the pro version. Absolutely worth it.
280. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here's these images, and how many shots have I got in here? All right. So we're going to grab all of these, and I'm going to pop them into PT GUI. So it's step one. So it's now going to try to assemble all these images. And the first challenge with PT GUI when you're assembling all these images is you have to figure out that I've actually got all the brackets in there too. Now PT GUI does the blending along with the stitching. So it will actually automatically recognize the lens you have. So it says, oh, you shot this with an 8mm fisheye. I know how to stitch those. And then what you can do is then go to, I actually run a sort of a preset to the template to start with, so that it actually lines things up a wee bit. And then you click on the align images. And what it does is it actually goes through and processes the images and does the best job it can to line everything up. And there's your first alignment. So that's step one. And you'll notice that I can now, with PT GUI, start looking at the image in this lower frame to see, have I actually done a good job with the stitching? Are there stitching errors? You know, if so, where are they? And the way you know where your stitching errors are likely to be is by using this feature over here, where you can actually see where those stitching lines actually show up. So it actually shows you where it's actually attempting to stitch things up. So then you can go back down and say, okay, I know where to look to see if there's an error. And you can even go down, and remember talking about the nadir where you're looking straight down?
Mm-hmm.
This is what a nadir looks like.
Ah.
Okay.
Now
And
we can all tell everybody that
mm-hmm.
we've seen Mark's nadir.
Exactly. That's what it looks like. So in an image like this one, what I'm actually going to be doing when I actually run through Affinity Photo is I'm actually going to be basically copying and pasting the floor, putting it back in, and also photoshopping out the shadow of the tripod to basically make it so that I was invisible in the shot.
Wow.
All right. So that's the process of fixing up these images. But step one is always to make sure that your stitching is really, really good, and to make sure that your balance of quality of color is good. One of the first things you check too is if you got power wires, make sure that they got stitched properly, because you'll see, I don't know if I actually were to zoom in here, I don't know if you can see that. You see how there's a bit of a stitching error?
Yeah.
Little tiny stitching error. Okay. So I'd have to go back in and either try to restitch that, or in Photoshop or Affinity Photo, go back in and fix that up. All right. So that's part of the process of doing, you know, proper work with the stitching process. And here's how I actually do the blending. I actually am using tone mapping in this case, but I could actually use, as opposed to tone mapping, I can actually use either standard HDR or tone map, and I can even export these images as 3 separate layers. So I've got the bright bracket, the dark bracket, and the properly exposed bracket as 3 separate layers, if I needed to be able to bring them into Photoshop and redo them in that way. Not a fan of doing that. It's more work for nothing for me. So I tend to just basically do all the stitching in advance, directly, and the blending directly inside of PT GUI. And once that's done, I can then export that image, and I still keep this as a 16-bit TIFF. So The size of this image, by the way, I don't know if it's probably too small to see on your screen, but it's actually 12,288 by 6144 wide. So that works out to being a 75 megapixel image.
Wow. So at 100 DPI, that's a 120-inch image.
That's exactly. But
Yeah.
remember, it's spherical, so it almost doesn't really matter to think about it that way, because what are you going to be looking at any time inside of a 360 photo is only a section or a field of view of it at any time, which is why you want that many pixels.
Right.
You think about, if I'm actually thinking that that's, you know, if you're looking at 12,000 pixels wide, imagine where we go down to a one of the, like the little Ricoh Theta that's a 6 or 8 megapixel camera. Now put that in 360. How many pixels have you got in terms of what you're looking at? Like it's pretty bad, you know. So that's why it's important to remember that you've got to understand that the quality of, this is where megapixels really starts to matter, you know. You really want to, now, people talk about, oh yeah, you're buying a camera with more megapixels than you really need. In the space of 360, it starts to make a difference. Okay. But once I've actually gotten to the point where I'm happy with the imagery, I can do an export. So I just click on the create panorama, and it'll actually create this panorama, and it will actually end up with the equirectangular image with the big problem with the patch, right? We've got we'll have a big hole in the bottom. So that's when we switch into, where is my screen share? And we switch into Affinity, so that I can go back and start fixing up the image. So I'm now going to share.
So you said
screen.
you use Affinity because of something specific.
Yeah, I'll share that with you shortly here. You'll
okay,
see
that's what
that
we're going to do. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So if you can see Affinity now.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to drag that same image I just shot. Oh, actually it's failed to stitch. Oh, it's still stitching. That's why. And that's the other thing too. If you don't have a very powerful computer, you don't want to be doing this. Like my rig. Yeah, I've got 32 gig of RAM. I'm running I actually find that my video card is too small with 6 gig. It's too slow. I want to get up to about an 8 gig card on that. So the GTX 1080 is sort of the ideal card for this.
Could you run an external GPU?
Yeah, you could do that. The external, great idea. But you still need a lot of RAM. You still need a lot of power.
Right.
And you got to remember that like each one of these images, like the 360, once it's stitched, is going to be a half a gig, right, as a 16-bit TIFF. So it's a big image. So once you've actually got that, you got to start looking at, you know, really how much power have I got under the hood. So that's one of the other areas of expense you have to keep in mind. So let me just grab one of these TIFFs here. That's actually not. I'm going to grab it. No, I've actually got the pool. I've got one of the pool ones here, so we can stay on the same shoot. I've just dragged that in.
And for those that haven't played with it, Affinity Photo is a sort of a Photoshop alternative, and it's quite powerful. I mean, let's just say that you don't want to use it for Photoshop type work. It does HDRs, it does focus stacking, it does panos, and so it has a lot of utility. So it's like what, $69 or something, I think.
It's incredibly inexpensive for what it does. The one thing I will, just as a fair warning, with all due respect to these guys, I love their product, but be aware, and I found out the hard way, that the only software support they offer is email support. Okay?
Right. I mean, it's for $69. That's probably where they feel they can save.
And for me, it's a bit of a shame, because there's times where you can't really explain yourself very well in an email when you're having a problem. I actually ended up having to thankfully, because of Frederick knowing these guys, he was able to help me lean in on them a little bit.
Oh, nice.
On the problem. Yeah, but it's you want to make sure that it's running properly before you just take, that everything's tickety-boo, so to speak, because otherwise it's going to be a real problem for you.
And it's on sale right now.
Is it?
Yeah, it's $29.
Oh, geez, folks.
I just posted a link in there. I know.
That kind of money, seriously, buy it. There's a lot of people who use this for all kinds of stuff, and it's in many respects, it's pretty well replaced Photoshop for a lot of the stuff I do. The only time I tend not to use use this is because it's for still images that where I just know where everything is in Photoshop.
Yeah,
But
Stan
this,
in the chat mentioned he uses it for focus stacking. I used to use that's how I discovered it. Is I used to
hmm
use another application for focus stacking that was like $89 and they had a
hmm
yearly subscription and I'm like, well, I don't do enough of that. So I started looking for alternatives and I came across Affinity and
hmm
their focus stacking is amazing. It's
yeah,
amazingly good. And then you
yeah,
have everything else on top of that. So
exactly. So the way that you actually look at it, see, you'll notice again, this photo is an equirectangular, so it's actually, it's a 2:1 ratio, which is how you actually uh, see these images. You'll notice at the very bottom of the image, if I zoom in, there's
mhm.
the nadir, but stretched out all the way across the bottom, right? And that's one of the areas I'm going to have to go in and fix. So the way I do that is I go into layer and I go to live projection, okay? And then I go into equirectangular projection. What I've done, I just put that as a hotkey as F8 so I can go into it quickly, but I'm just showing you where it is in the menu so you know how to find it. So again, layer, live projection, equirectangular projection. And as soon as I do that, now notice I can navigate in the 360,
Nice.
right? So if I want to go in and edit this over here, I can just go in and let's just go and use the one of the tools, and I'm just going to go and start patching this up.
And this is something Photoshop doesn't do.
It does it, but not anywhere as fast. So like,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
actually using the wrong tools. So let me just, okay. So I need to do the copy and paste. We'll use copy and paste. I'm going to do this quickly, obviously, because this is more conceptual, but now I can go in and start patching that up, right? So once this is all done, and
That's
let's just
great.
assume I've done a really good job with it. So now I've actually finished doing this patch. All right, and I'm happy with the final result. Let's just say that this is all done. Normally, of course, I'd spend a lot more time making it look a lot more realistic than that. And by the way, doing these types of patches can get real tricky, especially if you got like a carpet with patterns in it. It gets really hard to match up. So you really got to make sure you zoom in deep on it and you actually do a really good job. The other option, by the way, as opposed to doing a nadir patch this way, is that's a perfect place to put your client's logo. Just put it
Oh,
right up.
right over your little clone stamp? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Nice.
that becomes branding value, and I actually offer,
Sure.
that's something you can offer as an additional fee, saves you time, but you sell, tell you what, would you like me to add that on there for you so you can get some extra branding for you? An extra $5 per image. Boom, you yourself an extra $5 and it actually takes you less time. So a little sales pitch for you there, or sales idea. So once you finish the equirectangular view, you remove the projection. So we'll go back into the standard projection view and see, now we fixed the nadir.
That's great because if you tried to fix it there, then when it wrapped into the projection, it would look weird, right? Because
Exactly.
oh, got it.
Yeah, because you're working on a stretched image, right?
Right,
So
right.
that by going into the projection mode, it allows you to actually view it properly as if it was a flat image, far more like a flat image. So even things like, for example, if you're doing a fix of, let's say that I had an error in the pool, like along the pool wall where I had to straighten out where the stitch just didn't line up properly for whatever
Hmm.
reason. I bumped the camera while I was shooting, and I didn't have an extra set of 360s that I didn't reshoot properly. Well, then you'd want to be able to see it in a most live straight view, a standard equirectangular field of view, so that you can make sure the lines look straight. So once that's done, then quite simply, it's time to export. So you can go File and export the image. I use F9 for that, and I'll export. At this point in time, that's when I go into JPEG and get a published image. So this over here, exported, will probably end up being somewhere in the area of roughly about anywhere between 7 to 12, 13 megapixels as an exported image. And that's basically how a 360 photo is processed.
So
And
when
so
it's
there you
done,
go.
it's going to live in your library as a JPEG like that.
Exactly. And then that's what you use to publish onto a publishing platform. And from there, really, when you get into the world of publishing platforms, that's where basically, if you just take that 360 image and upload it like you would upload any image, the publishing platform will accept it and allow you to rotate through. But here's another thing to keep in mind, and this is a fair warning because I know what photographers are like. They go, oh, geez, yeah, but I want to fix the shadows and the highlights and all that kind of stuff. you don't want to be doing that the way you normally would in an image. Because, for example, if I were to go in and do shadows and highlights along the edge of the image, that's where the image wraps, right? If you notice where the pool sign is, and the pool, the outside perimeter wall of the pool, that's actually the same thing on the left-hand side that matches up on the right-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to do any kind of edits that were basically in a particular region, the only area you want to make any kind of changes is in the areas that don't touch that edge. Because if you do, you're going to see a stitch line. You're going to see a change in whatever editing you've done that where the wrapping point is of the image.
Right.
Okay. So that's a little trick of the trade that you know, I can tell someone who's, you know, not used to doing 360s. You go, yeah, right. They put it back into Lightroom and processed it, and they added a vignette. They thought it was really cool. It's a bad idea. You don't go putting vignettes on a 360. That's just not something you do. So yeah. So that's pretty well the process I use for creating the 360 images. So that's sort of the end-to-end process, and then of course publishing separately from that.
Right, but publishing is just simply you. No, I mean I say simply, but publishing is you uploading it to that service, and then you have a link, right?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. So if we actually
so on your website, those are those images hosted on your website by a plugin that runs them, or is it a service that links to that?
Okay. So the most all of the images that I show that are 360 on my website are published using or published to Google Street View. And to publish to Google Street View, first you have to be a Google trusted photographer. And that's where the vast majority of my photography is normally shown. And then from there, I use iframe technology. If you're familiar with the term iframe, I don't know if you're familiar with an iframe, where you can basically embed a website inside of a website. And that's how I actually re-display those images. But you'll also probably notice that a lot of the work I do, I actually put a layer on top of the 360 photos for navigation. So it adds essentially augmented reality hotspots and, you know, all kinds of really cool stuff with it.
So just in the simplest form, somebody's created all that, right?
Yep.
They've got their final image and they want to share it with a client.
Yeah. So
what's the simplest way for them to do that?
The simplest way for them to do that is to, and we have to be careful because each platform's sharing methodology is different. So if you're in Google Street View, and you've shot as a Google trusted photographer, you would go directly to Google Maps and find, in fact, let's go into a screen share and do it again because it's good fun to do these things.
Yeah. I mean, the chances that the average person that are watching this anyway, that's going to be a Google trusted photographer.
Well, actually, I do, you know, it's one of those things I do recommend people consider because, you know, as soon as you start doing this kind of work, you know, being Google trusted will actually give you some kudos. You know, people will actually respect you more in terms of, you know, if you actually can say you're on that program, you may get booked a bit more. So it's not a bad thing to do. So I'm just going to screen share here my regular screen. And let's just open up a new tab and go to Google Maps. So if you're on Google Maps, and let's just say, let's go back to that same car dealership. So the Worthington Mini Garage, right? So the way that so there's Worthington Mini Garage. You'll notice on the bottom left-hand side, there's 360 view. So I'm in the image folder. Then I've got all the 360 photos that I've shot. So let's just grab this outside shot. Let's say I wanted to start the virtual tour here and say, hey, customer, here's how you can share this with your clients. You'll notice there's 3 little dots over here. You click on those 3 little dots next to Worthington Mini Garage or the branding placard. You click on share or embed image. From here, you got the URL to share it, or if you want to embed it, you can get the iframe already created for you. And that's how Google Street View simple sharing is done. Otherwise, to be able to share it with your client, you literally have to create, if it's Pano2VR, you're creating an HTML package. You're actually publishing using their platform. If it's through Kula, you would be basically doing a URL or iframe from Kula. If it's walk into, the same thing. You're actually having to go into that platform's sharing tool and either sharing a link to the imagery or an iframe that has the link in it so that they can reuse it on their website.
Right. We have a question by Linda. She says, "Is this Affinity Photo the software that you're showing?"
This, no, this will be, right now, what I'm showing you is Google Street View. This is Google Maps. If
Got
you're,
it.
I don't know if, are we still sharing the same screen?
Yeah, yeah,
Are you?
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
you're able to do to do that because you're a Google trusted.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So like, let me just give you an example of going to Kula. So you can see some of the work I've done on Kula, because I tend to shoot more like the real estate stuff that I do tends to end up on Kula. So here's an example of a winery that I've done on Kula. And this is how they show it. And Kula does one other cool really thing is they can actually even add lens flares to it. So I actually added a lens flare because the sun just happened to be at the top of the building, so it makes it look really slick. And this is Kula's sharing system.
Oh,
So
nice.
if I want to share this in Kula, you click on share. I can share via Facebook, Twitter, or Reddit. They give you their link, or you can even click on the iframe content and you actually can specify how you actually publish it.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, Linda, the software before the Google Street View, that was Affinity Photo. So Affinity Photo was
Hmm.
where he went in and he fixed the nodal point and in the 3D view so that he could go in and retouch the image before you output the final to JPEG. So yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, that's still in the editing stage, whereas now what's on screen is the publishing
Yeah,
stage.
it's finished and published.
Yeah, yeah. So
That's great.
it's a bit of a different mindset in terms of what you actually look at when you're doing 360 photography. You have to think about it as photography, editing, and publishing,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to for example, wedding photography. It's really printing, right? That's sort of your
Yeah,
final output.
yeah, it's certainly a portion of that. I mean, we all cross many disciplines, but I can see where somebody that has more photographic skill is going to be a better 360 creator because they're going to understand exposure and depth of field and lens
Absolutely,
and how to edit and how to clean things up and
exactly,
yeah,
absolutely.
that's that.
And the other thing that's kind of cool with, for example, these with Kula is if you want to see a little planet, they make it real easy to create one. Bang, there's your little planet.
Nice.
Okay, so and you can even change the field of view on your planet.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So and one of the and there's some of the software like Panel2 VR allows you to start a virtual tour from a little planet view and then zooms down to being standard equirectangular, and then you can walk in from there with all your hot spots and links. So every one of these platforms has a whole heap of different features and functionality. So it's a very different form of photography. It's far more technical. But it's a lot of fun, and
No, it's
it can be a pretty cool business if you decide to go down that path.
No, it's fantastic. I can see this definitely being an addition to anybody doing real estate. And
Hmm.
again, like I think you and I were talking out if we were talking on while it was being recorded, but we were talking about how you need to set yourself apart from everybody else, and
Yeah.
there's not a lot. Like the market's not saturated with 360
Hmm.
photography. So, I mean,
Hmm.
even if you did it, you offered it to your clients and you created that and you made an additional $1,200, $1,500 a month or a quarter or whatever on top of your normal stuff you did,
Hmm.
that's a huge boon because not a lot of people are doing that.
That's
And
right.
I can see the benefits for this. One of the local facilities that I do a lot of weddings at, Eagle Glen
Hmm.
Golf Club, they
Hmm.
had somebody come in and photograph it and do a whole 360-degree tour, and it's
Hmm.
absolutely essential for
Hmm.
brides doing research
Yeah.
because
Agreed.
they can cruise through the room. And so what Eagle Glen did is they set the room up like a reception,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's so
Absolutely.
great, and they can see that space, and that's good, and you can offer that to anybody. So
Yeah. One of the things that I can show you one of the more recent jobs I've done, which I think will give you a really good idea on exactly just that perspective. This is a sample that I actually use for my clients all the time. It's a separate website that I've built that has a sample of a lot of my work, and this is where it's actually published with the overlay. And so, and this what it does is it puts it into auto rotation right away. So I start off at that same car again, but you can imagine that if I go into where's my club's function centers, the Crown Plaza in Terrigal. This is the place that Peter will recognize. He actually stays there. when he's in the area, which is cool. So he can, have a look around. But here's a great facility that you can actually have a look around in and see what it would look like if you were actually going to be having a function in this facility.
Mm-hmm.
Bang! This is how big the room is. You can see how many tables you can set up.
Nice.
Okay. And this was a relatively large project. Like when you're doing a shoot like of this magnitude, like this was to do this place, because I actually had to do 8 different meeting rooms, and on top of that, I was working alongside 2 other photographers doing still imagery at the same time. So we're basically, and of course, we're scrambling for space, and I'm scrambling for them to get the hell out of my shot because I'm shooting 360. So it's a bit
Those
of a
photographers.
Yeah, it's bloody guys, eh? But it was 2 days work. And this is an image capture in this case because of the amount of work that was involved. I had to go back at different times. So when you're doing large commercial spaces like this, it's a different type of a shoot than going and doing in a house where you can get in and out and do a 360 of a house. You should be able to shoot that once you've got your chops. You should be able to do it in as little as half an hour, possibly as much as about 90 minutes.
Wow. Well, I had a whole notepad full of questions. They've all been answered. You've done fantastic. You've got them all.
Good to hear. Excellent.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear also from the people that have attended, what's their takeaway? What's the thing that makes them go, holy geez, I'm excited, or I'm scared, or,
I don't know. I don't have anybody got anything that they want to ask Mark? Or is everybody ready? They're all going to go out and do it.
They're all getting, absolutely. But definitely, if someone's looking for some basic training in this space, more than happy to give them an idea of how to set up. Like there's a whole heap of different templating processes that I can help you with, depending on the gear you choose, because that's where it's like once you get that gear question out of the way, you then go, okay, all right, now I know what you're using. Here's how you're going to want to set yourself up in terms of hardware, in terms of your computer, your software that you're going to use. And also even when it comes to how you're going to sell, how you're going to promote yourself, because that's a big part of it. Like, as you know, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and that's where a lot of my work comes from, is actually by being well networked in the community. I'm on the board of directors for the tourism board. I participate I'm also I'm the marketing manager for the Norrie Head Lighthouse, with that lighthouse that we've been all showing photos of. So, you got to be involved in community. You've got to really understand that you're going to be dealing with a lot of local businesses. So your relationship with them has to be really tight.
Right. I'm going to go ahead and stop your screen share.
Cool.
Let's see. What do we got here? Of course, Stan wants to know if he can do this in macro.
I'll tell you what you can do as far as macro stuff, or really cool things that you can add in. And I didn't show this, but if you saw in those virtual tour samples, every once in a while you'd see like either a button, a flashing button, or an information card. Well, what you can do in 360 photos is add in still images as an overlay. So for example, let's say that you had done a virtual tour of, let's say, a gift shop or like a jewelry store. You could take macro photos of the jewelry and pop them on top of the virtual tour. So you can get a virtual tour of the store, but then show off the jewelry. The next cool thing is if they actually have a shopping cart attached to their store, you can make a hot link out of that photo back into their shopping cart. Talk about being coronavirus friendly, right?
Yeah. So if you were going to go from start, so let's say you had no gear, maybe you had a camera. This is kind of one of Stan's question, like how much to get started with a decent rig, but I'm kind of expanding on that a little bit. So, you've got your software, right? So let's say your software.
About $1,000 in software.
How much?
About $1,000 all up, if you think about it. Right. By the time you get Pana2 VR for publishing, because you're going to need that to publish, that's like €330. So whatever that works out to. But again, I'm also talking in Australian dollars, by the way. It's about 1,000 Australian. So it's more like, it's almost half.
Call it 600. And
$600.
And then you've got $400 or $500 for a nodal plate. And then you could have anywhere from $400 or $500 to $1,000 plus for a tripod.
Yeah, and your fisheye lens.
Right, 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 and then your lens. So, I mean, if you don't have a lot of that stuff, but maybe you have a camera, you could easily spend close to 2 grand, $1,500 to $2,000 to
Easily.
be working, right?
Yeah,
To be ready
exactly.
to create, which
That's right.
really isn't it
It's
isn't
not that
bad
bad.
because if
No,
you go buy like a new 70 to 200 2.8, even like a Sigma is going to cost you,
that's it. That's
$1,500. So,
exactly. And that's Sigma 8mm, brand new, which is still available. Like, I mean,
right.
check out the used markets for these lenses. The one thing you got to be careful is to make sure they're not scratched, because fish eyes as well as I do. They're so easy to
Yeah.
scratch, right?
Yeah.
And I've even got I've got a little dimple scratch on my fisheye now, and I have to be very careful because what it does is it causes a lot of lens flares. So
Yeah, you can't see it. It doesn't focus on it, but if the light hits it just right, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so one of the tricks is to actually, if I think I'm going to get a lot of lens flares, I literally flip the camera upside down and I shoot so that the
The marks
scratch
on the
is at the
bottom.
bottom.
It's clever.
Yeah, so it's just that it's a little less convenient from operating the camera.
Right, right.
But yeah, but so getting that lens is a good place to start
And
if
the
you're a
tripods
Canon
are just
shooter.
regular tripods, right? Just
Yeah,
any good tripod you
absolutely.
can balance. Something stable, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
more stable it is, the better.
Yep. The
Um,
other thing you'll probably notice that I actually don't, the way I level the tripod is I actually just increase or decrease the length of the
the
leg
leg, yeah.
or bend them in to keep the tripod as level as possible. And that's one of the things that most people forget is that really, shooting starting off level is a skill in of itself, because it's very easy to, be off because as you're rotating on the axis, there's a bit of, you do actually lose a bit of your leveling anyway too.
Right, right. So is
So
anybody shooting 360s with a drone?
yeah, there's people who do. I actually work on other people's images. They tend to ship them to me and then I stitch them for them. So, yeah.
Outsource the hard work, right?
Yeah, well, because the drone software will actually stitch it for you. You can buy apps that'll actually do the stitching, but they generally tend to do a lot of stitching error. There's a lot of fails. So bringing it into PT GUI and being able to manually add, one of the things I didn't show you guys is when there's a lot more involved in PT GUI than what I just showed you. Because you actually have to have stitching points
I'm sure that's a
inside the
whole
images.
class by itself.
It is. It actually, and that's where if it became something where somebody really wanted to go deep on how to fix difficult images, I'd actually be referring people to John Warkington's Panel Bootcamp. He's already got a full-on course, very well designed around that. The guy's a master at this stuff. I've learned more from him than anybody else. So it's about understanding like who's got the greatest skill set. But for basic setup to get up and running, to basically not get yourself into hot water, I could definitely do all that. But because that's try not to get yourself into trouble. That's number one.
Right,
I've actually
right.
I've actually even had situations where you go to shoot a 360, and imagine where you forget to shoot all 4 frames around, and you shoot 3. Oops! Like, what do you do then?
Oh
It's
my
like you
gosh.
can't even complete. Yeah, so now you're doing some really crazy photoshopping. Like you hope that what's actually in that missing area is something that's replaceable, and
Yeah,
I've done
not,
it.
not too much.
So
Well, thank you, Mark. This has been amazing, and we got down a solid hour and a half, which is fantastic. I will be
cool,
this is
awesome,
recorded, and I will be posting this super shortly once I get it all edited and everything. So
cool.
for those of you who
Yep.
maybe didn't catch everything as we glossed over, you can go back and you can watch it at your leisure.
Yeah.
If you want to connect with Mark, tell us your website. I know it's workpics.com
Workpics.com.
and on LinkedIn.
And the best social media, obviously for me, is LinkedIn. So I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. If
Yep.
you just type in my name as a search, you'll probably see me come up in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But I'm at linkedin.com/Marc Charette. You'll find me just that way.
And I met Mark, and he is a regular figure on the TWIP Pro community where myself and Peter Levshin actually hangs out. Peter actually went to Australia on vacation, well, many places, but he went and hung out with Mark and Craig Stampley from the community. So that's how we met. So
Yeah.
he's a regular feature there too,
Yeah.
showing his images. So thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate that. Everybody in the waiting room and absorbing all of Mark's amazing knowledge. And Mark, thank you. Have an amazing afternoon for you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just turned 12:30, so lunchtime it is, and it's been a real blast. Thanks for doing this, Troy.
Perfect. Thanks, bud.